Thank you so much. It's a very exciting day here in the United States. We have a new president. There's people are celebrating in the streets. However, I'm happy to be with everyone here in Argentina. Let me say, buenas tardes. Estoy de California. Estudiamos el español en la escuela. But that was a very long time ago. So that's the end of my broken Spanish. I'm going to speak the rest in English. And today I would like to go into emotional intelligence in a deep way, explaining for both coaches and educators the basics of emotional intelligence, why it matters so much for learning and for performance. And if we could, la próxima diapositiva, por favor, the first slide. This is my basic model of emotional intelligence. There are 4 parts. The first is knowing yourself, self-awareness, knowing what you're feeling, why you feel that way, how it affects how you think and what you do, using that information to manage yourself well, and then tuning into other people, empathy, and knowing what they're feeling without them telling us in words, because people don't tell us in words. They tell us in tone of voice and gestures and facial expression. But by reading that, by knowing and sensing what the other person feels, we can better manage our relationships. And so those are the 4 main parts of emotional intelligence. For people who are coaches, these are familiar because most of all of coaching has to do with 1 or more aspects of emotional intelligence, of soft skills, if you will. And for educators, what we call social emotional learning, or SEL, has to do with educating children in the basics of these 4 elements. In fact, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL, which is the largest organization worldwide that promotes this kind of education, names 5 pillars of this approach to educating children. And you've just seen the first 4: self-awareness, self-management, empathy, relationship management. And then the 5th is good decision-making, because it turns out if we are able to calm ourselves, stay clear in our thinking, tune into other people, we can make the best decisions. So I find that there is absolutely great compatibility between, say, leadership development, social emotional learning for children. I see social emotional learning, SEL, as a way to prepare young people to be better workers. It's workplace preparedness, and eventually leaders. It's the same skill set. And if we could see the next slide, please, I'll explain why that is. This is a more detailed model of the way I look at emotional intelligence. There are many different models, I should acknowledge, of emotional intelligence. This is the one that I use. And the 4 parts you'll see each have below them particular competencies or strengths or talents that people show that are nested within one of the 4 parts of emotional intelligence. But these competencies, I feel, are very important, particularly for the coaching, because these derive from what are called competence models that companies or organizations do themselves for proprietary purposes. They want to know, who should we look for when we hire? What should we look for in the people we promote, the high potentials? What should we develop in our leaders or in our future leaders? And the best competence models look at star performers, people who are in the top 10% by whatever metric makes sense for that particular role. And they compare them systematically with people in the same role who are only average or mediocre performers. And they derive the talents or strengths or competencies of the stars that you don't see in the people who are average. And that is what they want to identify in the people they hire, the people they promote, and in developing leaders. This was a radical idea when I was in graduate school. One of my main professors, David McClellan, was then proposing this idea. He wrote an article in an influential journal. He said, if you want to hire the best person for a job, any job, doesn't matter which, look first at people who hold that position now or have held it in the past. Identify the star performers and do this methodical comparison of stars and average performers, and then look for people, hire people who look like the stars, promote people who look like they could become stars, and develop leaders, help leaders develop and grow so they can look more like the stars. That's the competence model. And the 12 competencies that you see here are all based on this kind of research. For those of you who are coaches, I recommend the Emotional and Social Competence Inventory, ESCI for short. It's available in a Spanish version. It's a 360-degree assessment, and this allows you to work with someone you're coaching and have them pick 6 or 10 people whose opinions they trust, who know them well, and the person you're coaching fills out the questionnaire, and then the other people who they trust so strongly also fill it out, evaluating them in a behavioral way, what they show day to day and how they operate. And the person you're coaching then gets a very good diagnostic profile. It's like going to a doctor for a physical and having your triglycerides and cholesterol and so on mapped for you. And here you would map your ability to manage yourself, to empathize, to be a good team player and so on. And this helps you as a coach and the person you're coaching identify where they would do best to focus on their work together. So it's available from Korn Ferry. It's in Spanish. And if you're a coach, it might be useful. In terms of social emotional learning, I see what you're doing as a teacher if you're helping students develop these competencies or these strengths in these areas. It's workplace preparedness, as I said. It's leadership development, even for young people. Let me share also some new hard data on these so-called soft skills of emotional intelligence. Some of these studies are very fresh. The higher your emotional intelligence, the better your performance under stress. In these days of COVID, when the economy is faltering so much and people are having to adapt to working from home, for example, instead of the office, stress is very high. So emotional intelligence, one of the key components is self-management. And of course, it helps you do better. Having higher emotional intelligence not only helps you perform better, but it means you're more satisfied with your relationships, both professionally at work and privately in your home life and amongst your friends. It turns out even among construction workers, it's a little counterintuitive. A higher emotional intelligence means better job satisfaction, more commitment to your company, and less turnover. There was a study done recently with engineers, computer software engineers at a multinational. They're asked to rate other engineers whom they know and who they work with for their effectiveness as engineers. And it turned out that engineers' ratings of effectiveness had no correlation with their IQ and a very high correlation with their emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence also reduces negative moods. You're more satisfied, and that, of course, helps with better performance. This is interesting. This is from a meta-analysis where many different studies of emotional intelligence were put together as though it were one study. It's done by Ronald Humphreys and his group, and they found that for leaders, this is very important for coaches to know, the higher the emotional intelligence, the more satisfied their direct reports are. That is, the happier the people who work for them are. This makes you a boss we love, the kind of person people want to work for, not the kind of person people want to get away from. So the higher emotional intelligence, another meta-analysis shows, the better your what's called good organizational citizenship. This means you go out of your way to help colleagues. You don't loaf. You're not late to work. You don't bully other people. Another finding, in every major area around the world, higher emotional intelligence means better performance. I have a friend in Buenos Aires, Claudio Fernandez Oroz. He was the head of research at a hiring firm, executive hiring firm called Egon Zehnder. While he was there, he did a study. Zehnder wanted to know, of all the people we've hired, recommended firms hire rather, some of them have been fired, and we wonder why that is. So they did a study around the world. They did it in Asia, in Europe, and in South America. And they found in every case, the executive had been hired because of their outstanding business expertise, but they were fired for a deficiency in emotional intelligence. They just turned out not to be the kind of boss anyone wanted to work for. So let me tell you a story before we go to the next slide. You have to imagine with me a very snowy day. And I know in Argentina that might be hard to imagine. This happened in New England. And it was a 5-year-old. 5-year-old tells his mom, "Mom, I'd like to go out and play." Mom says, "Sure. But before you do, I want you to put on your snowsuit." Your snowsuit is what we would call in English a onesie. It's like a big pajama, but it's very thick, so you stay warm. And this kid had a tantrum. He didn't want to put on his snowsuit. "No, I'm not going to put on." He starts pounding on the floor, crying. Then all of a sudden he stops, goes to his room, stays there a while, comes out in his snowsuit, wants to go out and play. His mom says, "Hey, wait a minute, what just happened?" He said, "Oh, well, my guard dog got upset, so I had my wise owl talk to it and calm it down." And now if you could see the next slide, what that child was doing was talking about the prefrontal cortex. That's the wise owl. It's the brain's executive center. It's the prefrontal cortex is where we manage attention, where we comprehend, where we make good decisions, where we plan. It's in charge of creative problem solving and learning. Very important for you educators to know that the prefrontal cortex is essential for children's learning. And this child learned this language in a social emotional learning class. It's brain science for 5-year-olds. And what it says is that we can teach the lessons of emotional intelligence at every age, but we need to do it in a developmentally appropriate way. So you'd say it one way to a 5-year-old, different way to a 10-year-old, different way to a 15-year-old, as children's ability to comprehend grows with the growth of their brain. And it's very important for educators and parents to understand that the emotional and social circuits of the brain are the last part of the brain to become anatomically mature. It's the last part of the brain to become fully grown. So what you're seeing as a child develops and changes how they behave, you're seeing the external behavioral signs of the brain growing. And we can help the brain take shape in the best ways if we pay attention to helping children learn to be self-aware, manage themselves, tune into other people, and get along, which is the core of SEL for children. But the prefrontal cortex is in constant tension with the emotional centers. Those are the dark areas in the middle of the brain, particularly the amygdala. The amygdala is the brain's radar for threat. Right now, your amygdala is asking what it's always asked in human history: am I safe? And if the amygdala thinks there's a threat, it can take over the prefrontal cortex. And the amygdala in the brain's design, it only in an emergency can do this. But an emergency these days might be something which is not a biological threat, which is why the brain is wired this way, to help us survive, but instead a symbolic threat, like I'm not being treated fairly. That's a symbolic threat, but it marshals, mobilizes the same takeover of the prefrontal cortex, and stress hormones pump out, And there's some problems in this. For one, the prefrontal cortex, as opposed to the amygdala, gets a better picture of what's going on. The amygdala gets a fuzzy picture. Only a small percentage of what comes into our senses goes to the amygdala. But the amygdala has a hair trigger. Its decision rule is, I'd rather be safe than sorry. So it makes snap decisions, but based on very poor information. And it's reacting, as I said, to a symbolic threat these days, not physical ones, not something that's going to eat us or that we should chase because we eat it. That helped us survive in most of prehistory. But today, the amygdala mobilizes all of the biology of the emergency response to something that has nothing to do with our physical survival, to these symbolic threats. There are three signs of this kind of amygdala hijack. The first is a very sudden emotional reaction. Second, it's usually very distressing, anger, anxiety, you're just flooded with it all of a sudden. And third, you do something that you later regret, or you say something that you later regret. Those are the signs of an amygdala hijack. So during the hijack, your attention focuses on the threat, or what the amygdala thinks is the threat. And this can last for a long time. It could be, minutes later, hours later, middle of the night, you wake up thinking about, why did she say that thing to me that you found so threatening? Interestingly, too, memory reshuffles. You can more easily think of things that support the theory that the amygdala is putting out, which is that you're under threat from this thing. And the real danger is that we fall back on overlearned responses. We will react in a way that we regret later, a very childish way. I'm thinking of Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla. He, some time ago, I don't know if you remember this, he was very worried because they had announced that they're going to make a cheaper model of the Tesla 3, I think it was called. And they're having lots of problems in the factory. They're way behind schedule. And he's a bit of a micromanager. So he ended up sleeping on the factory floor, trying to troubleshoot problems and not sleeping very well. And he got so fed up that he sent out a Twitter message saying, I'm taking Tesla private. And it turned out that was a violation of federal law for him to say that. He was chairman of the board of directors of the company that owned Tesla. And as a result, he was fired for that position. He had to step down and he had a big fine. So the danger of the amygdala hijack is that we will do something that gets us in trouble in one way or another. And if we can look at the next slide, we can see the abilities or competencies that help us not be so hijacked. These are the self-awareness and self-management competencies. There's self-awareness, emotional self-awareness, particularly. Then under self-management, emotional balance, adaptability, the drive to achieve, and staying positive no matter what happens. And let me go into a little detail on each one of these so you'll better understand them. With emotional self-awareness, before I get to that, let me talk a bit about emotional self-awareness. That may be the next slide. Let's see. Next slide, please. Yes. So you know what you're feeling, why you feel it, and how it impacts your performance. You know your strengths and limits. You sense how other people see you, and so you have a realistic self-confidence. This is the kind of thing that 360-degree measure I was talking about helps you with. You see yourself as others see you, but you know realistically what you're actually good at and what you could get better at. This is very important for coaching. And you're in touch with your values and your sense of purpose. Now, self-awareness is pretty invisible, but our research suggests it's really the foundation of emotional intelligence. If you are self-aware, you'll be better at managing yourself. And it turns out if you're tuned out of a range of your own experience, you'll be poor at picking up that same range in other people. It hampers your empathy. And of course, we put how we conduct ourselves and how we sense other people are feeling, we put that together for the relationship management. So fundamentally, it has to do with how aware you are of yourself. And then that leads to the other abilities of emotional intelligence. And in fact, research shows that if you're strong in self-awareness, you might be strong in 10 of 12 emotional intelligence competencies. If you're low in self-awareness, you might be good at 1 or 2 of them only. So our research really emphasizes the importance of self-awareness. And I have a friend, I grew up in California, as I mentioned, and I grew up in a farm region, so did he. He was very bad in school. He almost flunked out, but he managed to go to a local community college. And he took a film course, and it turned out, even though he was bad at everything else, he was very, very good at film. He got into a film school. Student film he made impressed a director who hired him as a production assistant and got to like him a lot, and convinced a studio to finance a film that this friend of mine had made, had wanted to make. It was based on a script that he wrote, and he was allowed to direct it. And to everyone's surprise, that film did very well. So the studio backed another film of his, but actually he hated the way the studio cut the last version of the film. They had final edit, it's called. And he thought that they had destroyed his art. He's really an artist at heart. So he decided to not take their money, to go off on his own with the money he'd made from this movie and make his own. And friends of his in Hollywood said, "You're crazy to do this. You never risk your own money on a movie you make." But he did it anyway. And he almost ran out of money, barely finished. But you may have seen that movie. It's called Star Wars. George Lucas is the friend I'm talking about. And he has a very strong sense of purpose. He's very aware of what his mission or purpose is. He sees himself, as I said, as a creative artist. So he wants to control the final version of what he sees as his art. And this is another fundamental of emotional intelligence. You're able to get in touch with your sense of purpose or meaning, or in making a business decision. There's a study of California entrepreneurs where it turned out that these are people who started at zero and built a business that made huge amounts of money in California. And they're asked, how do you make your business decisions? And all of them said the same thing. They're voracious in finding information. They would look for data that other people wouldn't even consider. But they said, I always check it against my gut feeling, because even though it may look good on paper, maybe I can't trust these people. There may be a reason not to go ahead. And Antonio Damasio, who studies the circuitry underlying emotional self-awareness, says there's unconscious circuitry in a very primitive part of the brain that gathers our life wisdom as we go through events. When I said that, it worked very well. When I did this other thing, it worked very poorly. That's the life experience we bring to every decision. And this part of the brain, he says, has no direct link to the part of the brain that thinks in words. It has a strong link to the gut. We get a gut sense of what's right and what's wrong. This is data too. It's not that we ignore the information. The numbers are very important, but we can test them against this other way of knowing. So let's look at the next competency. This is emotional balance, self-control. And as I said, it really depends a lot on how well you can tune into yourself, how aware you are. But this allows you to keep your disruptive impulses and emotions in check so they don't run you. You can stay effective under stress, be clear-headed and calm. This is so important these days when stress is so high for everyone. And you can recover quickly from getting upset. It's not that you can control when you get upset. Our emotions come to us unbidden. We can't determine in advance what we're going to feel it, how strongly we're going to feel it, or when we're going to feel it. but we do have some control over how we act once we see it. In fact, the definition of maturity, some say, is widening the gap between that first feeling and how you respond. Young children have no gap, toddlers have no gap, but as the prefrontal cortex grows, then it is able to widen that gap, because it turns out there are two parts of the prefrontal cortex, just as there are two halves to the brain. And the left prefrontal cortex has some neural circuits that can inhibit that amygdala hijack. So this slows us down. This circuitry and developing the circuitry, educators should know, is extremely important in the growth of a child and the development of a child. It's called technically cognitive control, and it's been studied in a famous marshmallow test I've written about. I often talk about it. It was done at Stanford University with 4-year-olds, where the 4-year-old was told, you can have a sweet right now. There's a juicy one right in front of the child. Or if you wait till I run an errand and don't eat it till I come back, you can have 2 sweets then. And then the experimenter leaves the room. That poor child is left staring at that tempting sweet. And about a third of the children grab and eat it right on the spot. Another third wait the endless 7 or 8 minutes till the experimenter comes back, and they get 2. The children are tracked down as they're about to go to university 14 years later. And they find that the children who waited compared to the ones who grabbed get along better with their friends. They still can delay gratification in pursuit of their goal. It's a direct test of that. Cognitive control allows delay of gratification. And they have a huge advantage on the college entrance exam. This was stunning. Nobody expected it, but they learn better. And in fact, in a study in New Zealand, where more than 1,000 children were evaluated between ages 4 and 8, and then tracked down in their 30s, they found that cognitive control predicted better financial success and better health. And it did so more strongly than childhood IQ, or this is very important, more strongly than the wealth of the family that child grew up in. It levels the socioeconomic playing field. So cognitive control is extremely important, and it helps us calm down or stay calm under stress. I'll also share with you something I've been sharing with people in the medical profession, healthcare professionals who are on the front lines of fighting COVID. It's a very quick way to slow down. It shifts you from being controlled by the hijack, by your fears, your anxiety, tension, time pressure, the amygdala. It shifts from there to recovery from stress, that left prefrontal. And it's very simple. It's just a way of controlling your breathing. If you have a chance, when you see you're getting upset, just take a deep breath in so your belly expands. Hold it as long as is comfortable, and then exhale very slowly. And do it again, a deep breath in. Hold it as long as you can. Exhale slowly. And this shifts the nervous system from the hijack, what we call sympathetic nervous system arousal, the emergency response. It shifts it into what we call parasympathetic nervous system reaction, or the relaxation response. You're far more calm and you're able to focus, because the same circuitry which calms us down helps us pay attention what's important right now. And this, of course, is not just important for children. It helps them learn better, but it means an executive or anyone at work is better able to take in what's important, understand it deeply, and respond most flexibly. Andrew Grove, who for many years was the CEO of Intel, particularly back in its strongest period when it was the gut of every laptop. You remember the day when, before the internet, when laptops were supreme, everyone had a sticker Intel inside. He said, there were 2 times in the history of our company when we could have gone out of business. One was when our competitors were developing cheaper chips. We were in the chip business. We didn't see it coming. And the other was when we released a very complicated processor that had a deep flaw in it, and we had to go day and night to repair those or replace them. He said we could have gone out of business. What made the difference was how our top team responded emotionally. If we had denied what was going on, if we had frozen, you know, it's the fight or flight or freeze response, it's the amygdala hijack. If we had been paralyzed, or if we had panicked, if we had been just hijacked, we would be out of business today. So it's extremely important the top executives and the top leaders stay calm in a crisis. Another reason is that in a crisis, people look to the leader to see how scared should I be, how panicked should I be. And if the leader stays calm, it creates a sense of psychological safety for everyone else. So this is a key skill of leadership. And now let's look at some of the other self-management competencies. The next one, please. Next slide, por favor. And this one is the drive to achieve, or achievement orientation, as it was called by my late professor, David McClellan, when he was studying this back at Harvard. But it's extremely important. It's striving to meet some high standard of excellence, an internal standard. This is why people with this ability drive themselves harder than other people, because their standards of excellence are higher than those of other people. You look for performance feedback. You actually want to know, how am I doing? You appreciate feedback so you can learn to do things better. This is called grit sometimes. Angela Duckworth at the University of Pennsylvania has been promoting it, but it's been around for a long time. It helps us keep our eye on that long-term goal and keep it in focus despite obstacles, despite setbacks. Very, very important. It turns out our research says this matters most in mid-career, when people are individual contributors. Once you become the head of a division or head of a team, then you need to embrace group goals, organizational goals, for example. You can't just be concerned about your individual goals. And very interestingly, from a brain point of view, when we are thinking about how good it will feel when we achieve our goal, we're activating circuitry in that left prefrontal cortex. And it releases a surge of dopamine, that feel-good brain chemical. So it's important to be able to keep in mind how you'll feel when you achieve your goal in order to keep going. And now let's look at the next competence, please. After achievement is, por favor, the next slide. Positivity, having a positive outlook, seeing the upside in situations, the bright side. And this means you see the positive not just in situations, but in yourself and in people, in situations, and you expect to do better for yourself, and you also expect other people to do better. You don't dismiss them as they are. Now you see everyone can grow. This is called a growth mindset these days sometimes. Carol Dweck at Stanford University says the motto for this viewpoint is, I can improve, and so can you. That means you persist in pursuing your goals despite setbacks. That's that achievement. And you see opportunity where other people might feel devastated by a setback. You feel you can do better no matter what is going on. You can grow, you can develop. For coaching, this is extremely important. You want the people you coach to have this outlook, and you yourself as a coach need to keep the outlook of positivity, that you can help this person develop more strengths. And interestingly, again, in the brain, you see the left prefrontal cortex light up with this positive outlook, and you can cultivate this. You can do it through a number of means. One is journaling daily and about people or things you feel grateful for in life. That may be counterintuitive, but it turns out to increase positive outlook. Mindfulness, which is getting more and more popular in business settings these days, where you see your thoughts just as thoughts, so you don't have to act on them. It gives you distance from your negative self-judgment, like, oh, I'm so bad at this. And then actually doing things that are kind for other people also turns out to enhance positive outlook. Let me get back to how you deal with your own thoughts. Seligman at University of Pennsylvania has lots of research on depressed thinking versus optimistic thinking, what you see in positive outlook. He says depressed people, when they have a setback, tend to see themselves as having, being unable to get better in any way, and that it'll always be grim. So they don't see things as being able to improve. They explain things to themselves in a way where they give up when bad things happen. And the opposite point of view, of course, is positivity, where you think, well, I'm like that now, but I can change, or situations can change. Things can improve, I can improve. And that's the core belief in the positive outlook. And then now, please, the next self-management ability, competence, it's adaptability, being flexible in leading change, comfortable with uncertainty, able to juggle multiple demands. Now, multiple demands, by the way, may be you at working from home with your kids. I mean, the challenges have really been increased for many people in working at home. But it's being able to make it work, being adaptable, adjusting well to new challenges. Also very important, you can adapt to fresh ideas and you can come up with innovative strategies. You keep your goal focused and you find new ways to get there if old strategies aren't going to work anymore. What this brings to mind is a story of a Zen archer. He was invited to a place called Esalen Institute. It's on a high cliff in California overlooking the Pacific Ocean. He was going to do a demonstration of Zen archery. They set up a big target right at the edge of the cliff. Behind it was the Pacific Ocean. The Zen archer comes and pulls back his bow very mindfully. Mindfulness is key. And then he lets it fly, and it goes way over the target and it goes in the ocean, and everyone gasps. And the Zen archer says, "Bullseye." There's a saying Schopenhauer said, genius is seeing the target others do not see, hitting the target others do not see. This particular Zen archer was the teacher of a man named Steve Jobs, who made Apple so successful. And Steve Jobs was famous for coming up with innovative products that you didn't even know you needed so badly till you saw it. And it's, of course, captured a market here and there and there. And it's because he was able to come up time and again with innovative products. Contrast that with these co-CEOs of BlackBerry at the time. They were both engineers, and BlackBerry, before the Apple phone came along, captured the business market for phones. It had a fabulous keyboard, had very good security, and they kept tweaking that. It was a cash cow for them. They didn't adapt with new products. In fact, they didn't even see that Apple iPhone coming. They just kept improving their one product. There are two key strategies. One is exploring new possibilities, finding innovative strategies. Steve Jobs was superb at that. And the other is a little bit of rigidity. It's just exploiting what's worked so well for you in the past. So the difference is between rigidity and adapting. And in a leader, if you're rigid, it sends a message, you can't question the status quo. We're not going to explore new ways. And it's very, very damaging in terms of adapting to new situations, finding new products, and having a strategy that's going to work going forward into the future. And it turns out high performance teams are adaptable. Their motto is continuous learning. And research we've done on this competence, it turns out that being highly adaptable during your college years or while you're getting an MBA, 20 years later means you're going to be more satisfied with your success at work, and you're also more satisfied with your personal relationships in your life. So it's really, really important. The key here is seeing change as positive, as something you can utilize. And now if we can go to the next slide, this is the social brain. This is not anatomically correct, but it's to give you the idea that the forebrain, the front part of the brain, is designed to make a brain-to-brain link with the person in front of you. And now, Flo, I'm going to ask you for a time check so that I'll know how I'm doing. Can you say how much longer I have? Okay, thank you. So the social brain. This was a new discovery in neuroscience. It started quite by accident when a lab in Italy was looking not at the social brain. It was before that happened. They're looking at one cell that only fired in that monkey's brain when the monkey lifted its arm, never did anything any of the time. One afternoon, that cell is firing and the monkey's not moving, and the scientists are puzzled. What's going on? Then they realized the lab assistant had gone out for a gelato. It was a hot day in Italy, and he's standing in front of the monkey. Every time he raises his arm to take a lick, the monkey's neuron for the same action activates. They're called mirror neurons, and it turns out the human brain is peppered with them, and they create instantly, unconsciously, automatically a felt sense in us of what the person in front of us is not just doing, but what they're feeling, what they intend. This is what keeps interactions smooth. And mirror neurons are not the only kind of circuitry in the social brain. It turns out that the forebrain is packed with different kinds of circuit. For example, a study at Mass General, Harvard Medical School, looked at videos of interactions between doctors and patients, and they found that if they asked the patient to look at the video afterward and tell them, when did you think the doctor wasn't listening, didn't care, versus really tuned into you, really understood, when the patient said the doctor didn't understand me, the two physiologies, and they'd been measuring physiology, heart rate and so on, the two physiologies were completely independent, but when the doctor really understood, then the patient and the doctor, their physiology was like two birds flying in formation. It was completely in sync. So the social brain is very powerful in this brain-to-brain link and creating rapport. There are three ingredients of rapport. One is complete mutual absorption. You're paying attention to the person in front of you. The second happens as a result of that. And if you took a picture of people who are having this kind of simpatico interaction, you'd find, if you turn the sound off, it looks like their bodies are choreographed. And the third is it feels good to have this. So it's activating that left prefrontal circuitry for good feeling. And it turns out, this is very important for business performance. A study at Yale School of Management, several studies show that if the leader of a group, of a team, is in a good mood, people on the team catch the mood, performance goes up. If the leader is in a bad mood, people catch that mood, performance goes down. So it's very, very important at work. And there was an article some time ago, it's a classic now in the Harvard Business Review, it's called The Human Moment. It says, if you really want to connect with someone at work, you have to put aside your distractions. Turn off your phone, turn away from your screen, stop your thoughts, and just pay attention to the person in front of you. I think this is more and more important these days when we're relating to each other so often on Zoom or on some kind of teleconferencing, because in Zoom, it's very difficult to look someone in the eye because The camera is one place, the picture of the person is another. You can't touch the person. You can't sense, as you would in person, the nonverbal communication that tells you, for example, that this person, actually I'm thinking of a story. The CEO is coming up with a new business strategy, and everyone on the team, the C-level team, endorses the strategy except one person, the CIO. And the CEO picks this up non-verbally. She sees that that one person doesn't go along with what she's saying. So she makes a point of having a personal meeting with that one person who's opposing it to convince them, first to listen why they don't think it's going to work, and then to convince them, yes, it is going to work. And so she got unanimous backup for that new strategy. But you can't do that so easily on a teleconference. The teleconference, there's a little bit of loss in what the social brain would pick up face-to-face. Now, the phone is next best. It turns out the voice is a rich communicator of emotion. Text only is a disaster, particularly if you don't know the person. The amygdala can get hijacked. And if you're in person, other parts of the brain would say, hey, slow down. That doesn't happen online because you're doing text only. And you may hit send during the hijack and then you'll regret it later. This happened in Europe with some telecoms who had a working alliance to develop a new product. And the two sets of engineers never saw each other. They just communicated by email. And they had what are called flame wars. They just had hijacks. And it ended up they weren't making any progress. So a friend of mine, a consultant, was brought in to do something about it. And his solution was easy. He got them together for a weekend, have some beer together. They got to know each other. And it turned out then they could make progress after that. But it's because they knew each other. And in lockdown, we have real danger. So let me quickly finish up with the social, the relationship management and empathy. Next slide, please. First of all, in empathy, I'll go through all of these. Actually, let's go to the next slide, which is about empathy. Next slide, please. Empathy, you listen well, you understand how others see things, you can take their perspective, you know the terms they use, you can sense others' feelings, pick up nonverbal cues, you have an active interest in their concerns, you know their unspoken emotions. It's important to know there are three kinds of empathy, and each is based on a different set of circuitry in the brain. There's cognitive empathy, where you know how the person thinks about things. This means you can communicate well. There's emotional empathy, where you sense how they feel. But the third is different and very important. It's called empathic concern. You care about them. And it's based on the same circuits as a parent's love for a child. But it's what we want in our boss. We want a boss who actually cares about us. So from empathy, let me review for you why it matters so much, and particularly this third kind of empathy, because the first two will allow you to manipulate. And you don't want to be a manipulator, nor do you want to be manipulated. You want to collaborate. Empathy, particularly the third kind, helps you work well with other people, whether you're in sales, you're a member of a team, or a leader. It's essential. I remember someone at IBM telling me about a genius there, a guy who could solve any technical problem. He said, he's brilliant at finding solutions, but we can't put him in front of clients. The reason, he didn't look them in the eye, he made no contact, didn't do any small talk, he had no connection whatever. And it's empathy that allows us to connect so well. And the next competence, please, if you will, next slide. This is organizational awareness. It's empathy at a higher level. It's being able to read a group. You read the organization's emotional currents, the networks and dynamics. You know who are the influencers, who makes decisions. You can seize networking opportunities. You can read power relationships. You can better navigate your role. So it's very, very important, particularly because it turns out that influencers in companies, influencers in organizations, people who start to make a change happen, change makers, are not necessarily at the top of the official hierarchy. You can start from anywhere in the organization if you have good organizational awareness. And now the next one, please, which is influence. Here, you're able to have a positive impact on others, which builds trust. You can persuade others to support your viewpoint. You can build buy-in from key decision makers. And of course, if you have organizational awareness, this helps you go to the right person to make the decision you want. And it's very interesting, for example, that sales, which in a way is influence or persuasion personified, the top salespeople see themselves not as trying to make a sale, but as trusted advisors. They value the relationship more than a particular deal. And that makes them the kind of person who has greater influence because people, their clients, really trust them. So it doesn't really matter what your position is. If you can influence people, if you can persuade them, it's going to mean you can build that kind of trust. And now the next competence, if you will. And Flo, please give me a 5-minute marker. This is being a coach and a mentor. And the key idea here is that everyone in a leadership position should be a coach. And coaches, it's important that you understand this because you're modeling how the people you coach should manage their own direct reports. As a coach or a mentor, you foster learning and development, and you give feedback and support for that growth and development. You take a genuine interest in helping others develop their further strengths. You give timely, constructive feedback. You know a person's goals, and you could give stretch assignments, for example, that will help them master new abilities, that will help them achieve their own goals. To have leaders be a coach, it's important that they have that positivity, that growth mindset. They see the potential for development and talent. Too many leaders dismiss their direct reports as they are now, whatever their failings or limits may be, rather than understanding everyone can grow. And of course, that's the core assumption in social emotional learning, where every child can get better at any of these abilities. And it's important to take that mindset, that attitude into executive function. So a common opportunity to display this ability is when an executive or a leader gives performance feedback, and it's something you need to do. And it shouldn't be done just once a year. It should be routine, because you want to tell a person how they're doing. Remember that achievement orientation, the self-management ability, it's where someone wants performance feedback so they can know if they're doing well or not and what they can do to improve their performance. So you don't want to focus on the negatives. You know, you're bad at this and at this, and giving performance feedback. You don't want to judge harshly, but rather instead of looking at where a person fails, you want to give accurate feedback. You're good at this, not so good at that, really bad at that maybe, but you can get better. That's the key message you want to give. And as the person's boss, you may be in a position to give them a try at something will help them get better, or yourself to mentor, to coach them and help them get better. But the key idea is that the leader is a coach. So the question is, does a leader take the time to have a one-on-one conversation with a person? It's very important. Not about the person, not about the job rather, but about the person. What do you want from life? What do you want from your career, from this position? How can I help you? It turns out that our research shows that this creates a huge positive feeling. People feel cared about, feel known, feel heard, and they love the kind of boss who does that. And so now, please, the next
Dr. Goleman, you can have 10 more minutes if you want to wrap up.
This is managing conflict. And here you help others through tense situations, particularly when they don't get along with people around them. You can tactfully bring simmering disagreements into the open. This is very important. Being able to spot trouble before it explodes. You can find solutions everyone endorses. You understand people's different perspectives, and you can acknowledge their view of things. So you can see both sides. You know, the Harvard Negotiating Project, which talks about how executives and leaders can manage conflict. It says there are several signs of hot conflicts. One is people persist in arguing the same points over and over. They make personal accusations. It becomes about the person, not about the decision. And progress halts. That's like those European telecoms with the flame wars. So high-performing teams, it turns out, surface disagreements. They don't ignore them. They try to solve them while they're still simmering. And a good leader will be able to do this, but it takes, for the leader, some emotional self-control in order to intervene effectively. You want to control your own feelings, and you also want to empathize. You want to tune in. You want to understand or know that cognitive empathy. You want to understand all points of view. And then you can find a kind of win-win solution, which is maybe good enough for everyone to endorse. And they may not, both sides, neither side may be totally happy with it, but it's good enough. I think maybe our American election today is one of those kinds of win-win solutions. So let's go on to the next competence. This is teamwork. Please, next slide, please. Working in a group. You can work with others toward a shared goal, and you share both the responsibility, but also the rewards. You empathize with people in your group and also with other groups that you may need to interact with. You boost respect, helpfulness, cooperation. You build team spirit. You build positive relationships. You build pride in identity. And of course, there are many kinds of teams, many kinds of groups, maybe working across silos as a group. Of course, this is a more difficult kind of group to manage, a different kind of team, because you may have no direct control or direct ongoing interaction with the people that you're working with. Still, it's very important to acknowledge what they say in Japan. All of us are smarter than any one of us. There's research that shows that the groups invariably make better decisions than individual members. And it's also important to realize that the higher the emotional intelligence among the team generally, the better team performance. I'll go into that in a little bit of detail, but it's also important to understand that team performance is not the same as the potential best talents of every person. It really takes harmony. This is shown by research at Cambridge University in England, where they had very high IQ people on groups, but a lot of those groups just dissolved into who's the smartest person in the room arguments. And they found that if a group could harmonize, could overcome conflicts together, could keep their eye on their shared goal, those groups did better. My colleague Vanessa Dreskat, who's at the University of New Hampshire, has very solid research over decades in teams showing that emotional intelligence can be seen at the team level. And the higher the team emotional intelligence is, the better that team will do in performance by whatever measure makes sense for that team. I mean, a polyester factory, how much cubic meters of yarn that team could produce in a year was correlated with group level emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is exhibited at the team level by norms, she says. For example, remember that innovation depends on being able to support a new idea to see if it really has wings. At Sandia, which is a national laboratory in the States, where maybe 3,000 or 4,000 PhDs work, there's a group norm, a former director told me, where whenever anybody suggests a new idea, the next person who speaks has to be what we call in English an angel's advocate, not a devil's advocate. You have to be supportive. You have to explain why that idea might work instead of immediately knocking it down. That's the kind of norm we're talking about. And Druskat found several common norms. One, as I mentioned, is open confrontation, but being comfortable with it. And so it means people can bring up things that are not, that ordinarily might be ignored in a group. Like today, someone has a bad hangover, so we're not going to let them take the lead today, that kind of thing. Or there's a dispute between members, and let's get it out on the table and settle it instead of letting it explode. And sometimes there's also a lot of good feeling in these groups. It feels good to be on a team where people have emotional intelligence. So they might, let's remind someone of a norm. This is done at IDEO. They shoot soft Nerf toys at them. And so they pelt a person with soft toys if they're doing something out of line, just as a way of having fun. At the same time, you remind a person of what the group norms. Another norm is caring, supporting group members, listening even if you don't agree. But Druskat's work shows very definitively what you see in a group that's going to be high performing. And it's a kind of group emotional intelligence. And let me finish now with looking at the final competence. And this is one that our research shows creates a very positive, very, very highly positive emotional climate. You as a leader can articulate a shared mission in a way that brings out people's best. It turns out that leaders who can speak from the heart about what makes sense to them, what matters to them, are also able to say it in a way that resonates with other people. And this creates real, strong, positive feeling. They can also offer a sense of common purpose beyond day-to-day tasks, and they can name a greater good that really moves people. Such people are, such leaders are seen as highly effective by those they lead and also by their peers. This is what research shows. They create the most positive emotional climate. I'm thinking of a friend of mine, Bill George, who was a CEO years ago of a company called Medtronics. Medtronics makes many medical devices, one of which is pacemakers. They actually save people's lives. But Bill George, who saw their mission as saving people's lives, helping people, did something very important. He would bring people who had a Medtronic device in them to talk to the people on the assembly lines who put those devices together about how the people in the room who make the device had saved my life. It was very moving for everyone, but it reminded people beyond their day-to-day job of just putting this part in this pacemaker of how it matters, what it means, what the purpose is, the higher purpose. So it means being in touch with your own sense of purpose and meaning. You have to be inspired before you can inspire other people. So let me stop there. Thank you very much, and I welcome your questions.